All right, welcome back, Karibu. This is Melanated Truth. My name is John. We are going through our Torah talks. This is Genesis chapter 5. If you remember last time, we were talking through Genesis chapter 4. Cain is supposed to be, according to Adam and Eve, at least they're what it seems they were thinking, is that Cain, whose names means spear, was going to be the one that was going to bruise the serpent's head. Instead, he starts acting like the serpent and he becomes serpentine. He gets kicked out of Eden and he goes and makes a city for himself. And then the rest of Genesis 4 is tracing his line. In other words, the line of the serpent. It traces all the way from him, 7 down, to his offspring, whose name is Lamech. And Lamech is the first one. What happens with Lamech is essentially he accentuates all of the evil that's been happening. It's as if the genealogy of Cain is a descent into chaos. He represents the furthest extent of Cain's serpentine line, living and acting like the beast. So again, we're tracing in Genesis chapter 3. There's this proclamation that goes out. It's a curse of the serpent. There's going to be enmity between his line, his offspring, his seed, and the woman's line, the woman's offspring, the woman's seed. And Cain, Adam and Eve expect Cain's going to be the Messiah, but he ends up acting like anti-Messiah or anti-Christ. So if that's a little bit confusing, go back and watch our last one on Genesis chapter 4. At the end of Genesis chapter 4, excuse me, verse 25, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Set or Seth. For she said, Elohim has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Set also he bore a son, he named it, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of Yahuwah. So before we even get into Genesis chapter 5 and the genealogy that follows in Genesis chapter 5, a couple things that are important. One, the name Set means appointed or basically replacement. He is now the appointed one. They thought it was going to be Cain, but Cain kills his brother, thus acting like and living like the serpent. He gets cursed and likewise like the serpent, and he gets kicked out of Eden. When he gets kicked out of Eden, he decides to build a city. He builds a city. He dedicates that city to his son, whom he names dedication, Enoch, right? And now we see the rest of Genesis 4 is a descent down the line of the serpent seed, who is going to have enmity with the woman's seed, according to Genesis chapter 3. Now, in Genesis chapter, end of Genesis chapter 4, there's this son named Seth, which means replacement or the appointed or appointment. He is now the appointed one to carry the line of the seed of the woman. And he has a son named Enosh, which basically means weakness. And at that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. It's this big comparison. Cain's line is signified by self-reliance. They create a city, and essentially what a city is, it's an anti-garden. In a garden, you have everything that you need there. It's lush, it's beautiful, but you have to be ultimately dependent on the Most High. The sun has to shine, plants have to grow, and there's this symbiotic relationship between the garden and the people in the garden. In the city, it's the opposite. In the city, we have we can create structures that make us insulated from God, and this is essentially the first time that this happens. That Cain makes a city, which we might call eventually we would call a beast kingdom. That's a theme that's gonna play out for the rest of Genesis. Excuse me. So now we have again these two clear lines. In this line of Seth or appointment, we have his son he names Enosh, which means weakness, and it's as if Seth begins to see. Okay, so we're back, and Adam knew his wife again. So you've got these two lines. You've got the line of the serpent represented by Cain, and now you've got the line of the woman represented by Seth. And when Seth has a son, he says the people began to call on the name of the Lord again. Seth's line is characterized by building a city and essentially trying to insulate themselves from the Most High. Seth recognizes his weakness, actually names his son in light of the weakness that he recognizes, and they begin to call out on the name of the Lord. There is a big distinguished difference between the line of the serpent and the line of the line of man, or the line of the woman from which the Messiah is going to come. The line of the serpent is built on self-reliance, self-determination, insulating themselves from the Most High, and ultimately terminates in sexual immorality and murder. The line of Seth is going to be a little bit different. So let's actually look at this just really briefly. So here's what you get in the genealogy of Genesis 4. Adam, whose name means man. Cain, whose name means spear. Cain has a son named Hanak, or Enoch, which means dedicate or dedication. Enoch and Cain, after having killed his brother, gets kicked out and marked from God marks him. He gets kicked out of the garden, and what does he do? He builds a city and he dedicates it to his son. 7 down, we have this man named Lamech. Now, what does Lamech mean? I put here low man. Let's look at Lamech really briefly. Lamech, this is Lamech in Hebrew, Lamed, Mem, Kof. The particle Lamed means towards or for, and then this verb, muk or mawak or mak, this is a shortened version of it. It just means to be low, and it's not, or to descend, but it's not being low or descending physically. It's like humiliation, or to be socio or economically made low, humbled, right? Now think about this for just a second. Look at what we have here. Sorry, let's look at this part. Look what we have here. Adam, Cain, Enoch, Irad, these 2 guys, and then Lamech. And Lamech means low or towards the ground, socially humbled. What was the curse of the serpent? The curse of the serpent, though he was trying to exalt himself, the curse of the serpent was he was going to have to crawl on his belly and eat the dust. When the Most High confronts Cain, what does he say? He says, sin is crouching, crawling at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. He epically fails, and now his line continues, and it terminates or accentuates in this dude named Lamech, who is the lowest of the low. He's killed boys. He's got all these women, and he's to his wives. He's threatening, if you guys cross me, I won't hesitate to kill you. Right. So this is the line of the serpent. Now, what we're looking at today is now the line that Messiah will come through. Now, there's a lot of really interesting things that happen in Genesis 5, and there's a lot of interesting works that Genesis 5 is interacting with. And if you've ever tried to read it, it's probably a little bit difficult because these guys are living all these years and they're these funny names, and it doesn't seem all that important, but it actually is really important in the grand scheme of things. Here's why. It's important because this genealogy is interacting not only with Genesis 4, the seed of the serpent, but it's also interacting with what's called the Sumerian Kings list. And the Sumerian Kings list is basically a work from ancient Mesopotamia that's older than the Bible. And the point of the Sumerian Kings list was to trace the leaders, the kingship of that day all the way back to the beginning of the world. In other words, the kings of ancient Sumer, which would become Babylon, the kings of ancient Sumer could trace their authority to be king, to rule this terrain all the way back to the beginning. So before we even read Genesis 5, let's take a brief look at the Sumerian Kings list, because it's going to make all of what happens in Genesis 5 make a whole lot more sense. So this is the Sumerian Kings list. There's a bunch of things you can get it to it. Let me go up. Sumerian Kings list. You can do a quick Google and find this thing. I won't go into a lot of the background. But this is what Genesis 5 is interacting with, this Sumerian Kings list. It's basically what you call a polemic to this Sumerian Kings list. In other words, there were these people that believed that the gods had come down and that they had been given this divine right to rule because they were either part divine being or they had been given the divine right to rule by these beings. And this is their way to trace the legitimacy, to show their ancient connection to the gods, and therefore their divine right to presently rule. So Genesis is responding to that, and we'll see that'll be made clear, hopefully abundantly clear, by the time we're done with this. So this is the Sumerian Kings list. After kingship descended from heaven, interesting. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, and this guy became king for 28,000 years. The next guy, 36,000 years. The next guy, 64,000 years. Or yeah, these two kings ruled for 64,000 years, rather. And as you can see, and I'm not going to read all of this because I just want to put some highlights before we go to Genesis 5 and show how they're interacting with one another. This king lived for 43,000, 28,000, 36,000. These three kings, a total of 100,000 years. So on and so forth. These 5 cities, 8 kings, 385,200 years. Then it says this: after the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. The king in Kish, Geshar, was king, and he ruled for 1,200 years. So notice there's an exponential drop off in the amount of years that worked. Now, these kings right here, scholars theorize that these kings are the Anunnaki. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the Anunnaki. This is the Sumerian belief that the gods came down and they ruled over humanity. And it was their belief that they had ruled for this amount of time and done, and according to the Anunnaki, they had the divine right to rule because they weren't mere human. They were actually the gods. They were, yeah, we'll get to that by the time we get to Genesis chapter 6. But something happens. According to the Sumerians, the flood happens. And after the flood swept over, now all these kings are ruling for much less, a much shorter amount of time. And now these times match what we see in Genesis 5 a whole lot more. I want to go down a little bit more, and I want to show one name. Okay, so here we go. The divine, such and such, the shepherd ruled for 1,200 years, or 1,200 years. Again, there's this mix between the beings at the beginning are seen as the gods. These are the Anunnaki, and according to the Sumerians, they created humanity, and they created humanity to be slaves so they would mine gold for them. This is the Sumerian thought. According to Genesis, it was the Most High that creates man in his own image and makes man ruler of the terrain, and it is a divine being, namely Nahash, or the serpent, that gets mad that man is made to be part of the rulership, or really the rulership of this earthly realm. So now you see how these two are interacting. Then we have this guy named Gilgamesh. So if you've heard of the epics of Gilgamesh, this is the same guy whose father was an invisible being, the lord of this place, who ruled for 126 years. And this guy is the son of Gilgamesh, who ruled. So now what we've got is constantly this Sumerian Kings list is first talking about how the gods ruled, then the flood happened, and after the flood happened, now it's essentially demigods, the sons, or you might call them the bastard sons of these gods, which Genesis 6 is going to take on, which we'll get to eventually. But it's the bastard sons of these gods that have the divine right to rule because they were direct offspring of these people. Then in Uruk, he was defeated the kingship, and the kingship was taken to Ur. It's interesting because Abraham is going to be said to have come out of Ur of the Chaldeans. This is the very same place. So now the kingship was in Ur, et cetera, and it goes down from here. And this list continues all the way up into what was its present day. 21 kings ruled for 91 years and 40 days. Let me keep going. Again, the divine, this guy, the divine, this guy, the divine, this guy. All the way at 13 kings ruled for 213 years. Now, there's speculation that a lot of these numbers are highly symbolic and all these kinds of things. That doesn't matter for our particular discussion. And if you'd like to dive into this more, you're free to have, this is a great place to start. But the point for our discussion is the whole point of the Sumerian Kings list is to say we can prove that we have the divine, the Sumerians. We can, or by this time, probably either the people of the Ugaritic people or the Babylonians, we can prove that we have the divine right to rule because we can trace our rulership all the way back to the original rulers, namely the Anunnaki. Okay. Now, so the whole point is rulership. Who is supposed to rule this realm? They've got, and according to them, they've got the receipts that their rulership goes back to the gods, and that rulership descended from the heavens. All right, now let's actually look at what the scriptures say, what Genesis 5 says. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When Elohim created man, he made him in the likeness of Elohim, male and female. He created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. Adam lived 130 years, and he had a son in his own likeness and after his image, and he named him Seth. So now we're gonna follow a very specific line. This phrase right here. This is the book of Genesis. This is the book of the generations of Adam. This is a common theme that's going to happen in Genesis a few times, and it's the phrase Toledot, and it's just talking about this genealogy thing that we're doing. And these genealogies become more and more important because we're following specifically a family. Remember, we said way back that Genesis is not about the beginning of the world. Genesis is about the beginning of a family. And now, as we see Genesis interacting with the Sumerian Kings list, we're talking about a family who the Most High is given the divine right to rulership and to leadership. We'll explain that as we keep going. When God created man, he made him in his likeness, so on and so forth. Adam lived 130 years. He fathered a son in his own likeness and after his image, and he named him Seth. So we're following now Seth's line. Seth lived this many years, and he had a son, and he named him Enosh. Enosh lived this many years. He had a son named Kenan. So on and so forth, all the way down till we get to verse 21. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah, and Enoch walked with Elohim. Enoch walked with God. That's interesting. Now, there's a lot of things that we'll go on that says Enoch walked with God and he was not because God took him up. Now, just think about it in the terms of not the rest of the Bible that is to come, but in what has happened before. Who walked with God? Who walked with God? It was Adam and Eve. It was said that they walked with God in the ruach of the day, or in the spirit of the day, or in the cool of the garden, depending on which translation you're reading. But it was Adam and Eve that walked with God. So now what we have is a restored relationship. So through Cain's line, we see a descent into utter chaos, and we have it accentuated in a man named Lamech, who is a murderer and who is a womanizer. So it seems, and he just it's just a fold into chaos, right? And that's what you would expect from a beast kingdom. This man Cain gets marked, much like he gets marked because he follows the beast. He goes and creates a city, makes a beast kingdom, and by the time we get to the seventh generation, we've got this man whose name means humiliation, essentially, and or a low life, is you could say in the modern vernacular, and low life is a low life. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we've got Enoch. This is Lamech is the seventh down from Cain. Enoch is the seventh down from Seth, and Enoch, his name means dedication, and he walks with God. He's starkly different than Lamech. Lamech and Enoch could not be more different than one another. He walks with God, much like there's a restored Edenic relationship between Enoch and the Most High, and then God takes him. And then it goes on. We'll look at all these names. If you'd like to pause, you can read it yourself here, or you can pause it here and read it in the Bible yourself. But I want to compare these two genealogies really briefly. So this is the line of the serpent, or the line of Cain, because Cain follows the serpent. These are his names. It ends in this guy named Lamech. Now, the line of Seth starts with Adam, goes to Seth. Seth has Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yarad, and Jared, or Yarad, means to descend in Hebrew. And according to the book of Jubilees, which is in the Apocrypha and also in the Ge'ez Bible, the Ethiopian Coptic Bible, the oldest Bible that we have on earth, Jubilees the books First and Second Enoch, and others are in the canon of this scripture, right? So anyway, in Jubilees, it says that Yerad, he's named Yerad, Jared, because in those days, the sons of God descended on the earth. We're going to pick up more of that in Genesis 6. So we've got this dude named Yerad. Yerad has a son, and he names him Enoch. This is the same name. So Cain has a son, names him Enoch, and he dedicates a city to him. Yerad has a son named Enoch, and Enoch walks with God. Interesting. So it's same name, but two very different people. Then you have Methuselah and Lamech. Whoa, Lamech has the exact same name as Lamech here. So 9 down from Adam. On Seth's side, you have another dude named Lamech, and his name is also obviously also means humble. It's a play on words. One guy is a lowlife, and it's obvious by the way he treats his wife and the way he talks about murdering people and about the way he talks about the consequences of what happens if somebody messes with him. Another one means humble, and the reason we know it means humble is because he has a son. Let's actually look at it. He has a son named Noah. Okay, here we go. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground, remember the ground was cursed. Man came from the ground, but the ground was cursed. And then Cain was cursed from the ground, right? Out of the ground, Yahuwah has cursed. This one shall bring us relief or rest. So Noah means relief or rest from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. So what he's saying is he is prophetically, all of these names, if you can't tell by now, are very strategically placed. But what Lamech is doing, the good Lamech, is he is prophetically naming Noah Noah, because he's saying God is going to bring us relief through this one. In other words, he is this is Messiah. If not the Messiah, he is a messianic figure, right? Adam and Eve expected Cain to be the Messiah, named him Spear. They expected he was going to crush the serpent's head. Instead, he acts like the Antichrist. Now, on down the line of the one name appointed, Seth, we get to the 10th person, which is not just divine. So 7 down is the divine accomplishment or the divine fulfillment of a number. So you got Enoch there. But then 10 in Hebrew culture or whatever, it means not only completion, but like earthly manifestation. So what we have beginning in Enoch's life, him walking with God, restoring an Edenic ideal, we get it begin to manifest in Noah's life. And what Lamech says, Noah's father says, is that's going to begin to be made manifest through this Noah. Through somehow God is going to bring rest on the earth through Noah. Noah has other sons from their painful toils, talking about reversing the curse and the consequences that man has from these curse. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years, had other sons and daughters. Now, this phrase is really important. He says it a bunch of times up and through Genesis chapter 5, that he has other sons and daughters. It's specific. It triggers us to know these are not the only people on the earth. These are not the only thing that's going on, but these are specific. It's a very specific line that is being traced. Thus, all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he lived. And after Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, Shem, Ham, and Japheth are going to be Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth are going to be the survivors of the flood narrative. So, okay, so let's step back just for a second. You've got the seed of the serpent and all the nonsense that comes with the furthering of sin and the living like a beast and becoming a beast nation and a beast people, the self-reliance, the pride, and ultimately it's a culture full of lowlifes, right? Then you've got the line of Seth, and Seth names his son Enosh, which means weakness, and people begin to call on the name of the Lord. And then 7 down from Seth's line, you get, or from Adam's line on Seth's side, you get a man named Enoch, and his name means dedication, and he's clearly dedicated to the Most High. He, like Adam and Eve before him, pre-sin, he walks with God. And then a few down from him, you've got a dude named Noah, and you begin to see manifest on the earth through Noah. At some way, we're going to see rest come through Noah's life. Now, this sets us up to understand a little bit more about what goes on in the flood narrative, Noah's Ark, and all those kind of things that we've heard since we were in Sunday school. But this is the backdrop of Noah's Ark. It's the tracing of these two lines that are at war with one another. If we think through the line of Seth in light of the Sumerian Kings list, you have the Sumerian Kings list that have these Anunnaki gods, and we're going to deal with that in Genesis chapter 6 specifically. These lowercase g Anunnaki gods, and they trace their rulership all the way back to what they say from the very beginning, right? And they're supposed to rule, and because they're in rulership, humanity is supposed to be enslaved to them and do whatever they say, right? The Bible says something different, that humans were actually supposed to rule and reign on this terrain, that there was a divine being that comes and messes that up in order to usurp authority from Adam and Eve, and he finds himself cursed. And because he's cursed, he's now cursed to eat dust and to crawl on the ground. He's going to have descendants that are going to make war with the sons of Adam, or the sons of, Adam and Eve, right? Okay, so now think about the Sumerian Kings list. You have all of these divine beings going all the way back to what they say is the beginning. Let me just pull it up one more time. This is how the Sumerian Kings list begins. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, and you had all these kings that lived really, really long time. And then after the flood had swept over and the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. The whole point of the Sumerian Kings list, again, I'll say, is about who is the king, who has the right to rule this terrain. The scriptures say something very different than the Sumerian Kings list, namely that we've got the same records. We can date ourselves all the way back to the Most High himself. He's the one that made man in his image, and he's the one that appointed man to be the rulers. And now we're tracing the line of this very specific group of humans, this very specific group of sons of Adam that will be charged to be the rulers and leaders of this terrain. Now, who is that? Let's fast forward ahead really briefly, because what happens is essentially the Sumerian Kings list. There's a split where it's first the Anunnaki gods. You saw that. And then it says that the flood happens, and then there's a split. And then all the other list of the kings are these pseudo divine beings, these demigods, which a lot of other cultures have in their history, that the reason those particular kings get to rule is because they're descendants of the gods, Hercules and those kinds of things. We'll probably get to all that stuff eventually. But you get the split in this genealogy, and where Genesis 5 stops with the genealogy. It tells the story of the sons of God, and then the flood, which we'll get to next week, and then all of the flood narrative, and then it picks back up on this genealogy in Genesis chapter 11. And in Genesis chapter 11, it picks up on these are the generations of Shem being the son of Noah. And it goes down 10 more generations, and it says, when Terah had lived for 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. These are the generations of Terah. And then it gets into specifically the calling of Abraham. The whole point of this list in Genesis 5, and then its completion in Genesis 11, and the flood narrative that's in between it, the whole point is to trace all the way back to Adam, not just any lineage, but the lineage of Abraham, because the rest of Genesis, from Genesis 12 through Genesis 50, is going to be about the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then eventually Joseph, who gets sold into slavery into Egypt. But the whole point is we're tracing the lineage of the family that the Most High has created to rule and to reign, to be. I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll see some of this when we come to Genesis 12. But this is why this is strategically placed here. Genesis 5 in Genesis, the end of Genesis 11 are split apart, and there's these stories that are placed in between it. But this is a cohesive genealogy. This is one genealogy, and the genealogy matches that of the Sumerian Kings list. So it's as if under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, the Hebrew author is saying, you say that you have a divine right to rule because you are descendants of the God, or which in Genesis 6, it would call it a Nephilim, right? You say that you have divine right to rule because you are descendants of the Nephilim, or you're a Nephilim yourself. We know the Hebrews, we know that we have been given the divine right to rule, and we equally have a set of receipts to prove it. So this is Genesis 1 through, or really Genesis 4 through 11 sets itself as a polemic to respond to the quote unquote mythologies of the day about what happened during the flood and how it happened. And the Hebrews want to set the record straight. And according to the Hebrews, it's the Most High Yah who did the flood in the first place. And the Most High Yah did the flood because of rebellion. We'll get there. But we can trace our records all the way back to Adam himself, who was made in the image of God and blessed to rule and to reign. It was not Nahash. It was not the serpent that was given the divine right to rule. It was not the quote unquote gods, according to Genesis 6, that were given the divine right to rule. It was Adam. And Adam passed it to Seth. Seth has this line that goes all the way to Noah. Noah is rescued by the Most High, him and his sons. He has these three sons. The blessing goes to Shem. Shem traces his records all the way to Abraham. And in Genesis chapter 12, we can actually start the story. This is what Genesis chapter 12 is, where the story of Genesis actually starts. So all of this is preamble for us to get to who Abraham is and why Abraham matters. So if you are just finding out that you're a Hebrew, that you come from the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by blood, you understand that you have a divine responsibility and a divine right. And maybe I should say that the other way. You have a divine right, but maybe even more than that, you have a divine responsibility. And just like when there's great power, there's great responsibility. The seed of Abraham, which ultimately is Messiah himself, according to Galatians. He's not talking about seeds. He's talking about seed, the one seed, Yahusha, Messiah. He is the seed of Abraham, right? But according to the blessings and the covenants, according to Ephesians chapter 2, we find ourselves along this lineage and this line who have a different set of responsibilities than anybody else. So I want to end this with this prophetic word from Isaiah chapter 52. He says this: awake, awake, put on your strength, O Zion. Put on your beautiful garments, that is your royal garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For there shall no more come into you the uncircumcised and the unclean. Shake off the dust and arise. Be seated, O Jerusalem. Loose the bonds from your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. In other words, if you've come to find that you are the descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you come to find out that you've actually been put in chains for a really long time, and you're waking up to the truth of who you are and whose you are and what responsibility you have, Isaiah 52 says, yeah, get yourself out of the dust. Start conducting yourself differently. Start maneuvering in this world differently, because you have a divine responsibility that goes along with this divine right. We indeed were called to be a kingdom of priests to the Most High. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Some people might say, well, what about the Gentiles? Doesn't it say that the Gentiles are engrafted in? Absolutely, Gentiles are engrafted in, but Paul makes it very, very clear. It's for the Jew first, then also for the Greek. And the same responsibilities that belong to the Israelites as a kingdom of priests to the Most High don't necessarily go to the Gentiles, the same responsibilities. So yeah, we're called to govern ourselves differently. We'll get to all those things that might have actually stirred up more questions than answers up to this point. But this is what we're called to. Let me go back one more time. What's in a genealogy? What's in a genealogy? Well, in these genealogies, what we get is the divine receipts, and this matters exponentially. This is also why when Messiah comes, there's a very distinct and clear genealogy that place him in the Davidic line. Right? He's legally a descendant of David. The reason why this matters is because all this has to be we got to have receipts, and we've got to see that this thing is done legally and correctly, and correctly. And this is what this is. This represents another record. As we trace the seed of the serpent and the enmity they have with the seed of the woman, we also see that the Most High is creating a plan to reshape the world and to set the world right on its Edenic path by using a family. All right. This is Melanated Truth. My name is John. This is another Torah Talk. If you have any questions or, whatever, comments, or if you disagree, you can most certainly put that in the comments or email us and we can talk it through. I want to end this like I always do. Romans 15:13. May the God, the Elohim of hope, fill you with joy and peace in believing, so that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Hallelujah. Amen. See you next time.